Welcome, welcome, welcome. I see you all filling in your seats. Give you time to get in there and grab you some light snacks, maybe some pencil and paper if you want to write down any notes that you may want to comment on later in the Q&A section of the show. Without further ado, I am Marlo Brooks. Welcome back, everyone. I'm very happy to be back as well in another week of Corps, that is Conversations on Race and Policing. And this week's topic, we'll be talking about policing different DNAs and how our focus on diversity and policing may be misguided. So with our presenter today, I think it's gonna pose a lot of questions with you guys as well that you may want answered by our presenter or some of my co-hosts as well. So don't forget to spike that Q&A button so we can get to that section during the Q&A section of the show. Our presenter is going to be great, guys. Can't wait to dive into this, to today's topic as well. So I am joined by my co-host, Zorlin Oglesby. First year here. Zorlin, would you like to say hey to everyone? Introduce yourself to them.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zorlin Oglesby. I'm a junior here at Cal State San Bernardino. This is my first year here on campus. Because of COVID, I've never actually been to campus, so I'm sure it's a beautiful thing. But I know Cal State purely online. I'm looking forward to today's talk and learning about some new things.
That's great. And as always, we have my friend, community leader, and Westside Action Group's president, Mr. Stan Futch.
Good afternoon, everybody. Looking forward to another exciting conversation. And like Zorlin said, I'm looking forward to learning something.
Great, great. So as always, to kick the show off, we're going to pay homage to the land on which CSUSB sits on. So we recognize that California State University of San Bernardino sits on the territory and ancestral land of San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. We recognize that every member of the CSUSB community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution was founded in 1965. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationships to Native peoples. And by offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold CSUSB more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous people. So we thank you. I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. We're gonna turn things over to our very own Dr. Mary Texeira. It's going to be bringing us an introduction today. So, Mary, take us away.
Thank you, Marlo. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to introduce Dr. Haberfeld to our West Coast audience, our San Bernardino audience. And just want to let Zorlin know to just hang in there. The campus is absolutely gorgeous. So we hope that we're going to be back in the fall. And so Dr. Haberfeld is a professor of police science at John Jay College in New York City. She was born in Poland. And I think you're our first Polish immigrant, Dr. Haberfeld. So we're very honored. And immigrated to Israel as a teenager, and you're also the first Israeli that we've had on our panel. Okay. She's an expert in law enforcement, terrorism, and white-collar crime in the United States, Eastern and Western Europe, and Israel. Since 2001, Dr. Haberfeld has been involved in developing, coordinating, and teaching in a special educational program at John Jay for the New York City Police Department, and I'm sure she'll tell us about that. So with no further ado, please make Dr. Haberfeld feel welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's my turn now, yes? Or...
Absolutely,
okay. All
yes.
right, okay. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. I dedicated my entire life to the police profession. I truly believe that professional, fair, equitable policing is a pillar of democracy. And unfortunately, we are far, far away from where we should be in this profession. And as unfortunate as last year has been, from my perspective, at least it brought to the national and international attention to things that I've been talking about doing research on, writing about, publishing for the last 30 years, and had a very limited audience. And so sometimes from horrible things, positive things evolve. And these conversations to me are really the epitome of everything that I was hoping for, that people will start paying attention to what is happening. But also demystifying certain perceptions and concepts that people have about the profession. And this is something that I would like to start with. So there was this very insightful historian, British historian, but his name was Charles Rees, and he started thinking about the idea of policing and why do we have police? And he actually took us thousands upon thousands of years BC and trying to create this theory. And I think the theory is an excellent one, and I adopted it. Why do we have the police? So try to envision for a moment this primitive society, and primitive in the sense that we're talking about, I don't know, 20, 30,000 years ago, when people started to realize that maybe living alone is not such a good idea. And they started to come together to live in this Stone Age societies. And in each of these societies, there was somebody who became very quickly a leader. And how do we know that? And this is something that actually has to do with my formal education. I actually have an undergraduate degree in prehistoric archaeology. And this is why I was very impressed with this theory, because almost in each and every prehistoric dwelling, regardless where on the earth we're going to look at, there is one dwelling that is bigger and larger than all the others. And from this we extrapolate that this was the dwelling, the house, the hut of the leader of this particular community. And when they came together, of course, there was a distribution of responsibilities and distribution of tasks. Certain individuals were hunting, certain individuals were gathering food, others were bringing water. And according to Rees, one day, one of these individuals decided that he or she doesn't want to do it anymore. But the community depended upon this individual that I coined berry gatherer, to extrapolate from the theory a little bit and make it a little bit lighter than it is. The berry gatherer wakes up in the morning and says, don't want to gather berries anymore. And everybody runs to the leader and says, this individual doesn't want to gather berries anymore. But we need berries. And the leader looks around and says, okay, we need to convince our berry gatherer to go back and bring the berries to our community. And of course, being a leader, he or she is a smart person, doesn't want to do it by himself or herself. So they need to designate somebody to go and convince the berry gatherer. And of course, we can make this assumption that the designation was not based on individual's IQ, but rather on physical strength. Who do I send to convince the other individual to gather the berries? And this is how the first police officer was born. Somebody who was designated by the leader to convince the berry gatherer to go back and do his or her job. And of course, the assumption, the follow-up assumption is that that person probably used coercive force rather than de-escalation techniques to convince the berry gatherer to go back to work. So fast forward to 19th century, and a very smart, but deceitful, at least in my mind, politician in the UK, who was in charge of creation of the Metropolitan Police Force, Sir Robert Peel, who said that in order to create a professional police force that will police in a way that will be perceived as equitable and fair, we need to do one thing: take the politics out of policing and take the police out of politics. So this is the point of departure for my talk today. What happened 200 years ago, and by the way, Sir Robert Peel is credited with the creation of modern community-oriented policing. He created this concepts, the ideas, but again, with clear recognition that until we have politicians involved in policing, nothing will really be as professional as we want to be. And to Charles Rees and Sir Robert Peel, I would like to add another individual. And this individual basically is a sociologist by the name of Bittner, Egon Bittner, who also tried to find the answer, why do we have the police? And he said also something very interesting. We need the police because something ought not to be happening, and this is direct quote from him verbatim, something ought not to be happening about which something needs to be done right now. Not tomorrow, not in a few hours, right now. This is why we have the police. And of course, he also gave an illustration for why do we need the police when such a thing is happening. And the story behind this, his story that we have two neighbors. They live in the house that is, two houses that is separated by a fence. One neighbor has an apple tree that is close to the fence. And the apples from this neighbor's tree are falling into the garden of the other neighbor, who happens to hate apples. So he goes to his neighbor and politely asks him to pick up the apples and take the apples away because he's allergic to them, whatever. And of course, the neighbor with the apple tree says, I don't want to. This is my tree and I can have it wherever I want it to be. So to make this long story shorter, the dispute between the two neighbors escalates to the point where the neighbor who wants the other neighbor to pick up the apples goes and gets the gun. And this is where you get the police. And this is where you call for the police and expect them to resolve this, because if you leave it without the police, somebody will end up dead. And this is not what we want. So this is the explanation for something ought not to be happening. This quarrel should not be happening. And something needs to be done about this right now, because if not, the neighbor with the apple tree will be dead. So where are we in the year 2021? We are at a place where people out there are told by police commissioners, police chiefs, politicians for the last, I would say almost 40 years, from the advent of the idea of community-oriented policing, that police organizations are here to serve and protect the communities. This started again with the promulgation of the idea of community-oriented policing. Police are here to serve and protect the communities. Well, they're not. They're here to serve and protect the politicians who appoint the police chiefs and police commissioners, who control everything from standards for recruitment and selection, through training, through discipline, promotions, and operational deployment. And this is the most critical part, that nothing really is left in the hands of the actual professionals, the police chiefs and the police commissioners and the sheriffs. It's all in the hands of the politicians. Now, politicians, as we know, represent a small segment of the community. They come from one community and not always, and rather rarely, actually represent the interest of this given community that they come from. From 1985, I would say, 86, there is a tremendous push to diversify American police departments, and for that matter, police departments around the world. Based on the perception, and again, the word perception is the operational word here, that if we're going to diversify the forces, all the problems between communities and the police will somehow disappear. Now, Professor Texeira mentioned that I ran a program that I actually co-created for NYPD 20 years ago. It's a certificate in police leadership. And this certificate in police leadership was created by me together with two colleagues 20 years ago in the aftermath of Amadou Diallo shootings story. And I was given a certain amount of money and asked to develop some sort of a program for the NYPD officers to create a change in the perception that the officers, or perception or actual reality that the officers are biased and this needs to be changed. When I created this program 20 years ago, we started with a pilot of 600 NYPD officers that started with us just summer before 9/11. When I walked into the gymnasium when we had the 600 officers, I cannot tell you how I felt. My heart was just out of my chest. I saw all these officers, the most diverse force on earth. And I go to police departments on a regular basis. I travel to vacation, and instead of going to museums, I go to police departments. You know, this is how I am focused on this profession. I have never seen a diverse force like NYPD. And over the last 20 years, and I have them in my class every Friday for the last 20 years, different groups. We offer 4 courses, so every year I have new cops. I would say between 70 to 80% of NYPD officers in my classes are minorities. And yet, again, fast forward to 2021 or 2020, tremendous tensions between the communities, minority communities in New York City and NYPD. So why did I title my talk today, Policing Different DNAs? And it has to do also with my own personal background. I was a police officer. I was a horrible police officer. From the perspective of time, I can judge it. I was very young. I was poorly trained. I got a lot of power. I was a ranking officer. Wasn't prepared for this, but I also have a temper. Not as much today as I had when I was a younger person, but I have a temper. The last thing on earth that I would want to see in a police officer with whom I would have an interaction is somebody who looks like me or acts like me. Because I would be in a very unfortunate position. Coming from a communist country, being born in a communist country, I was never really very religious, although I'm Jewish. I was always told that I am Jewish, but without any other explanation. I had a Christmas tree every Christmas, so this is how Jewish I was in terms of my upbringing. When I started teaching years ago here in the United States, I taught on, one of my classes was on Yom Kippur, which is for the ones of you who do not know, the holiest day in the Jewish religion, when we are absolutely prohibited from engaging in any type of work. One of the students said to me, "Professor, why are you teaching tonight?" I said, "Why not?" "But you're Jewish." I said, "So?" The perception that just because I am Jewish, I observe that holiday is a wrong perception. Yes, I am Jewish, but I don't necessarily observe this holiday. Yes, I am a woman. I don't necessarily want to be policed by a woman. Who I want to be policed by is somebody who is emotionally mature. I became a police officer at a very young age, the same way police officers become police officers here. I became a supervisor at a very young age. I was barely in my early 20s. We know today from various peer-reviewed psychological studies, clinical psychology, people do not mature emotionally fully until their late 20s. So basically, when you are 20 years old, chronologically, you are, yes, you're 20, but mentally, emotionally, you're a teenager. So look what we're doing. We are recruiting people who are barely teenagers. We are giving them the ultimate authority to take other people's lives when they have zero emotional control or very little emotional control because they're not fully developed emotionally. And on top of everything else, we run them through training that is in comparison to other countries, an embarrassment, a true embarrassment. And granted, there are different police academies around the United States. Some are as long as 32 weeks, but there are also police academies that are as short as 10 weeks. And 10 weeks academy means after less than a semester runs 15 weeks, you're giving a person the power to make split-second decisions, which are decisions that police officers have to make. That's not some fictional depiction of police work. Police officers need to make split-second decisions all the time about other people's lives and about their lives. But again, stay with me here. If I am emotionally immature because I am not emotionally developed, I don't have my emotional intelligence. If the tools that I have received from the academy are absolutely inadequate, because I was given 40 topics in 10 weeks or 15 weeks or 16 weeks, an average training today in America is about 17 weeks, which is an equivalent of a semester. Will it really matter whether I'm a woman, a Black person, a Hispanic person? It's not going to matter because I am not the right person for the job. Add to this additional thing that we are the only country that allows this. I'm talking about the only country out of the democratic countries. I don't know what's happening in various totalitarian regimes, but we are the only country out of democratic countries that allow people with criminal records to become police officers. Now, Psychology 101. Past behavior, the best predictor of future behavior. Don't need to argue this with me. This is again, Psychology 101. I happen to believe in this. And it's not about people not deserving a second chance. It's about a profession that has the ultimate power. And a profession that has the ultimate power of life and death. That's not a profession that I would like to see somebody given a second or a third chance. There are many other professions that people can choose. If they really care about this type of work, there's a lot of need for social workers. They can go there, but not to a profession that has this ultimate power. So we have people who have background that does not qualify them to be police officers, lack of maturity, lack of understanding what police profession is all about. And add to this, again, going back, this political interference. Politicians do not only control police departments and how police officers are deployed, they also control the narrative. So what is the easiest way to get out of trouble when there is a serious conflict between a given community and police department to throw out there a simple solution. We'll diversify the force. We'll give the police officer sensitivity training. We'll give the police officer de-escalation training. I look at this and see how people in communities are buying into this rhetoric. But these are false rhetoric. If I am the wrong person for the job, no sensitivity training or de-escalation training is going to change me, because I simply don't have what it takes to understand what the organization is telling me to do and how it's telling me to do it. You know, when I started writing about policing as a profession, my first book that I am mostly proud of is titled Critical Issues in Police Training. In this book that I published 20 years ago, I identified a number of problems that this country will face unless something is going to change. 4 problems. One of these problems was multicultural policing. It was clear to me from day one, when I arrived here over 30 years ago, that there are tremendous tensions between various communities and the police. It was clear to me that police departments do nothing when they recruit and train their officers, nothing serious, put it in a more precise way, to change these dynamics. It was clear to me that the politicians don't allow the police chiefs and commissioners to change anything. And this was problem number 2 that I referred to as open communication policing. To me, open communication policing would be for police commissioners and chiefs to engage with their communities in open conversations, something that people are talking about now, but again, I talked about this 20 years ago, about what can and cannot be done for the communities from the perspective of how they are policed. Again, explaining to them that the police chiefs might want to deploy their officers in a completely different direction, doing something completely different. But yet the mayor will tell them, no, you're going to police this community and not the other. You're going to deploy saturated patrol in this neighborhood and not in another neighborhood. And it doesn't matter at all how operationally sound it is or it is not. And frequently it's not rather than it is. So this was the second thing. The third thing that I identified that's lacking in American policing and created what we are seeing now, lack of leadership training. You're lucky to be in California. California embraced leadership training for its police officers, not the way I would like to see it, of course, but at least as a concept for many years now. But most of the other police departments around the country don't. And this is where you're seeing police leaders who should not be leaders. When we refer for a moment to Ferguson and what happened in Ferguson, the police chief over there and the decision he made, he had no business of making these decisions. They were horrible decisions with the deployment of military equipment against his community. But when you look at his bio, you'll understand very quickly why he made this decision. He was not a good fit to be a police leader. That's as simple as that. And the fourth problem that I identified was lack of stress management training for police officers from day one. Policing is a very taxing profession. And I'm not talking about the high profile events and cases that make it to the media. I'm talking about things that police officers see on a daily basis that very rarely make it to the media. For example, a fatal car accident, seeing people killed, dismembered. Nobody really talks about this. It doesn't make the 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock news. seeing people abusing their children, seeing people abusing their parents, seeing people abusing their spouses. A lot of these things, again, were accounted for by police scholars over the years. And basically, I think there's one sentence that it's always stuck in my mind, that police officers see people unadorned in their social trappings. They see them naked in a way, they see them in their worst behaviors. And this is not something that anybody talks about, but this is something that takes its toll. Takes its toll to the point that you never forget about things that you've seen. You are never given any tools to deal with things that you're seeing. And sooner or later, it affects your judgment. It affects the way you stereotype people. It affects the way you use force. And nobody until now takes this thing seriously. Even now, everybody is talking about these two things of de-escalation and sensitivity, and nobody's talking about much more fundamental problems that will either make our police forces different and respected by the communities, or we will continue having the same discussions for years to come. One of the things that always creates, at least in my lectures, creates a vivid discussion is when I walk for the first time into the class, when I start my courses on policing, and I put on the blackboard behind me 5 or 6 different professions: medical doctor, airplane pilot, captain on a boat, bridge engineer. And I ask my students, if it was up to you, if you were to pick somebody for one of these for all these positions, the best person for all these positions, would you pick based on their race, based on their ethnicity, based on their religion, or based on their skills? And why did I pick up these positions? Why did I pick up these professions? Because all these professions have potential impact on your life. If you go to a wrong doctor, the doctor can kill you. If you are flying an airplane and the pilot is drunk, the pilot can kill you. If you take a boat, a ship, a ferry, and the captain is not the right captain, you can drown. And if you go on a bridge, whether on your bike, on your car, or just walk, and the engineer behind this construction was somebody who just didn't know how to do his or her job, you're dead. And of course, everybody says, without exception, I would pick the person with the skills. Not the person who looks like me, who thinks like me, who have the same set of beliefs. I'll pick up the person with the skills. And then I put the profession of police officer. Why would we feel any different? On the contrary, we should feel even more, we should feel stronger about police officer having the skills rather than looking like us. Because the police officer has much more power than the doctor, the captain, the pilot, the engineer. If I don't like the doctor, I can go to a different one. If I feel that the pilot is doing something wrong as I board, I can leave the plane, and so on and so forth. You know where I'm driving at. People will say to me, so what are you saying? That if we diversify the force, we cannot find people who look like us and also have the skills? Oh, sure we can. But we have to start by looking at what it takes to be a good police officer. And we're not there. As long as we continue to hire people who are 19, 20, 21 and give them the powers, it doesn't matter what color or ethnicity or religion they are. They just don't belong on the job. They don't have what it takes. As long as we give them less than a semester of training, of tools and skills, they might be the best. They just don't know how to do the job because they don't have the skills. In order to be called a professional in any field, you need to have an academic degree. That's what departments in Finland, in Norway, Germany require. They have police universities, not training academies. Police universities that last between 3 to 4 years, that give the people who want to be police officers, they're not even sure if they're going to be police officers, the skills, the education that they need to do this more complex and complicated job. It's hard to generalize, and I try not to. But overall, what I'm going to say, some people might not like, because it is in a way a generalization. But I'm going to say it anyway, because it is not just my feelings. It is not just my perceptions. It is based on 3 decades of solid research, spending time in police departments around the country and around the world, and training police officers around the country and around the world. I think that United States of America, and the great country that it is, has a responsibility towards its citizens, its communities, to transform our police forces in the most fundamental way. Not to create an impression that ethnic, racial, gender diversification will solve the problem. Not to create an impression that 7 days of multicultural or sensitivity training will change the problem or will solve the problem. Not to create an impression that it is a problem between a police department and the community. It's not a problem between the police department and the community. It's a problem between the communities who are willing to be, are willing to accept people who should not be part of this profession. And again, people always say it, and I say it, there are a lot of great police officers. I would say there are a lot of great people on the job in the United States of America in terms of wanting to do the right thing, but not necessarily knowing how to do the right thing. And this is the difference. And this is why I said I am generalizing, because yes, I think that overwhelming majority of police officers want to do the right thing, but they don't know how to do it, or they don't have what it takes to do it. You know, I study leadership, and this will be probably the end of my presentation. In leadership, to be an effective leader, you have to be both willing and ready. It's not enough to be willing. It's not enough to be ready. You have to have both qualities. Want to do a job and ready to do the job. And it is my profound belief that American policing today does not have enough officers who are both willing and ready. And this is the end of what I have to say. I'll be more than happy to entertain any questions.
Oh, I think we'll have lots of questions, Dr. Haberfeld. I think we'll have lots of them. Stan, did you want to start? Did you have a question?
I will. I'll jump right in there. I was a 34-year firefighter. And over the years, we got people in on the job, and people, like you said, some of them had good intentions, but weren't good firefighters. But I will say this, when the fire department hires a person, they know the person's gone through probably 1, maybe 2 years of training that's in the colleges to get to that level. So that's 1 year, say 1 year. And then they take them and they put them through an academy, like you said. And that can be, like you said, the problem with the academies is some of them are 9 weeks, some of them are a year. And so they go through the academy and then they go even further. And so now they're on the job. They've gotten through both of those. They're on the job and they actually, they're not a firefighter. And so their officers are encouraged by upper management to not lose them because too much has been invested in them up to that point. So here's my question. Do you believe the police departments allow its members to continue to keep their jobs even though they lack the skills to perform their jobs?
Absolutely. And it goes to my conceptual model that I developed about 15 years ago, and I coined it the Pentagon of Police Integrity or Police Leadership. And the first prong is looking at recruitment, selection is the second, training is third, supervision is fourth, and discipline is fifth. It is my profound belief, and it is very much the situation in policing, that once you go through the academy, the consideration is, oh, it costs so much money to put you through the academy, so we'll keep you. This is absolutely what's happening, that people who finish the academy, who are unfit for the job, by the way, most of the academies require you to just, the passing grade is a C, 70, okay. As an academic, if I have somebody who passed the skill test at the level of a C, I don't want this person to continue to grad school because I know that they are not a grad school material. If a police officer graduates from the academy with an average of 70, you should reconsider. But later on, you have this person on the job. And again, you look at the discipline. And you look at how officers are allowed to stay on the job with many violations. And there are violations and there are violations. It's one thing to fall asleep in your patrol car. It's another to use the wrong type of language because you happen to be biased. There is no, in my mind, there should be no second chances for officers who display any type of biased, racist behavior. This is not suspension without pay or demotion. This is congratulations, you've just been relieved from the force. Go and find another profession. But we have unions, and the unions don't allow these things to be happening, which is, again, in many other countries, unions do not exist. One of the things that I admire about police department, policing as a profession in Finland is that after they finish the police university, which takes over 3 years, there is a panel. There is a panel that interviews the candidates. And one of the things that they are asked, because the university program is composed of both academic and field work. So they know what policing is. They're asked, do you feel right now, after 3 years, that you are the right person to be a police officer? And if the person feels that they are not, or if their training officers and instructors and professors feel that they are not, this is the end. Well, one thing to be said about this, higher education in Finland is for free, right? So there is no consideration. We invested in that person for 3 years. Now we need to keep them on the job. But I would say we are rich enough in the United States to allow this to happen. If somebody doesn't belong on the job, it might mean that somebody will lose their life. Somebody else will lose their life. Let's not keep anybody on the job who doesn't belong there. And again, let's not give them 17 second chances. For sleeping in a car, yes. For engaging in other behaviors, conduct unbecoming, no second chances.
And I did like the way you were talking about how other countries, they have to have a higher education. I think that's very important. I think that's, Mary and I have talked about that in the past too, and I think I agree with that, that the more education you have, the more you've learned, the more you can interact with other people and in a positive way as opposed to an aggressive or negative way. So one of the questions that was asked from our Q&A is, at what age do you think should be the optimum age to join a police department?
So I've written already about this. I think 25. And again, 25 because many people feel that policing is a profession for younger people. So I need to somehow consider their feelings. But really, gone are the times where, you know, we were chasing after the perps and scaling the fences. I mean, that's something we see on television. Policing is an intellectual work, a work that requires emotional, social intelligence. And there's no way that anybody has this intelligence before they're at least 25. So I would start recruiting them at the age of 25 and then putting them through at least 2 years associate degree, or preferably 3 years university, like in Finland, like in Norway, like in Germany. So by the time they hit the street, so to speak, they're like 28. And I think nothing wrong. 28, starting police work, understanding things from the perspective of what you've learned, understanding things from the perspective of your emotional development. You know, still until today, people who want to become police officers in United States have to go through agility test. I don't care how many push-ups you can do in a minute. I don't care how far, you know, you can run in 5 minutes. Who cares? That's not police work. I mean, when it amazes me that this is one of the qualifiers. While once you graduate from the academy, nobody cares in what shape you are. You can balloon to 500 pounds. You are not required to pass any physical test. There is such a disconnect between what we're looking for in police officers when we're recruiting them and then what they actually do when they're on the job.
I do know that when I was in England, one of the things that most students would do after they graduated from secondary, modern, or high school, as we call it in America, they would go on tour. They would see the world. They would take off and their families would pay for it and they'd just go around and see what's going on. Then they'd come back and go to college. So that's a year off of what their life is. So now they're in college. And like you said, then they do 4 years of college. And you're right, by then they're around 25 years old. And then they get into the service form. I think that's right on step, because I think a lot of people are not mature enough to take another person's life into their hands at 21, 22 years old.
You know, you mentioned England. UK actually about 2 years ago made it mandatory now to all its police officers to have an academic degree. Yes. So this is mandatory now in UK, and all the and all the universities there now are creating new programs, especially for the in-service people that need to. So to join now, you will have to have an academic degree, but the entire force now has to go and get the degree. So there's more and more recognition around the world that this is what's needed for the profession.
And I'm glad you mentioned that California is doing better than a lot of other states, because I know on my job now, a lot of degrees are coming in the door. And with those degrees, the downside is everyone's competing to be the boss. So there's a lot of smart people and everyone wants to be the boss. And so there's a lot of upward mobility, but I do think those that are coming in seem to be more in tune to not only their job, but in intercommunications with other individuals. And I think in law enforcement, that's vital. That's so vital. Let's see if we have any more questions here.
Can I slip in
jump
here?
Right in there, Mary.
Stan, thank you. Maria, I have so many questions because obviously your take on what we've been doing in the last 30 weeks or 40 weeks or so is a little bit different, where we have sort of focused on the macro in terms of what police departments can do and not looking at the individual police officers. But I'm fascinated with your theory about not having diversity in police departments. What we're all about is why police officers, white police officers, are killing Black men. And I'm wondering what skills were lacking when Chauvin put his knee on George Floyd's neck. What skills were lacking? Can I just finish? What skills were lacking when Mike Brown was shot and the officer in his testimony said, "It came running after me. It came toward me." And on and on and on and on. What skills would it have taken for those Mississippi police officers to not kill those 4 civil rights workers? Mm-hmm. I'm having a really, really difficult, because that your theory is not mainstream theory in terms of diversifying police departments. And I'm just please go ahead.
Sure. Let me answer just with a short story. I used to have a student for many years. He was a police officer from Liberia. He came to John Jay. And, since I've been talking about this for quite a while, it was a while ago, eventually he went back to Liberia, became number 2 there in police force. So when we were talking about these issues of white police officers versus Black communities, I said to him, well, at least you don't have this problem in Liberia, right? Black police officers policing Black population. And he looked at me and said, "Oh, you're very, very wrong about this." And I said, "How come?" And again, I don't know much about Liberia. I know more now, but certainly didn't know much back then. And he said, "We have the same problems as in America." I said, "How can you say this? I mean, you're all Black." And I said, "No, in Liberia, it goes by the shade of Blackness. Mm-hmm. So the ones who are darker are targeted by police officers who are a little bit lighter." I said, "Okay, but you are still ethnically the same." He said, "No, it goes still by the color." Okay, so going back to America and to Chauvin. Chauvin, first of all, it's a prime example of an officer who should not have been on the job prior to the event with Mr. Floyd. He had a number of complaints against him about use of excessive force, about misconduct. This is a prime example of what I'm talking about. Get rid of this person. It's conduct unbecoming, cannot be a police officer. The other cases, whether it's Michael Brown or any other case that we can look at, what these officers were lacking, again, are a number of things. they were willing to be police officers, but they were not ready to be police officers because they were either biased or misguided, or were under the impression that they can do whatever they can do and there'll be no consequences for what they're doing. That's a function, again, of what I was talking about for almost 40 minutes. There is almost a year in most of the departments after police officers graduate from the academy that they go through what's called probationary period. This is when they're observed by their superior officers, the FTOs, the field training officers. That's a long time to identify behaviors that are less than desirable. Of course, to have it done properly, you would have to have the supervisors who are the right supervisors, and you will have to have a different consideration with regard to, it costs us so much money, as was mentioned before, so we'll keep that person on the job and give them a second chance, right? So it's very hard to screen out all the people who do not belong on the job. Let's say hypothetically that Officer Chauvin had been hired at the age of 25. Or the officer involved in Michael Brown, Wilson, I believe his name was, would have been hired at the age of 25. Very hard to screen out people who have certain biases. They're smart enough to say what they know needs to be said, right? I'm going to police in an impartial way, and justice is blind, and all this rhetorics that are out there. But sooner rather than later, they will display the undesirable behavior. Studying police misconduct for over 2 decades now in many departments, overwhelming majority of officers who are involved in problematic encounters, this is not their first rodeo, so to speak. They had prior types of misconduct or conduct unbecoming. So how do we deal with this in an organization that has a proper leadership? By something that I said at the beginning. No second chances, no probation. There are certain behaviors that are not going to be accepted or are not going to be acceptable. Surprisingly enough, you know, I'm a big believer in the general deterrence and personal deterrence. Once there is a word of mouth out there that certain behavior will make you fired, people start paying attention to their ways of conduct and misconduct. I spent almost 2 years in Charleston, South Carolina, doing research there in Charleston. They had an amazing police chief, the late Reuben Greenberg. He was really known around the country for his unusual way of policing. He was actually an African-American who was adopted by a Jewish couple, therefore the name Reuben Greenberg. Everybody knew in his department, if you engage in conduct unbecoming, if you do something that you're not supposed to do, and somebody sees you doing this and covers up for you, that person will receive a greater punishment than the person who was engaged in conduct unbecoming. Very quickly, it broke the blue code of silence. Very, very quickly. As somebody told me there when I was doing one of the focus groups, somebody told me, I'm not stupid enough. I'm not that stupid to be fired because somebody did something they were not supposed to do. This was the end of code of silence there. So going back to your questions, can we screen everybody out? No. But if we can screen overwhelming majority by using the right tools, whether it's age or or later on the length of the academy, or later on the FTO period. But if this doesn't work, then we can screen people out through proper supervision and discipline.
Thank you. So what are your thoughts on defunding the police?
I think it's a disastrous idea. Anybody who is familiar with police budget knows a very simple equation. Between 85 to 90% of any police budget goes to salaries. What's left is training and equipment. If you defund the police, the first thing that will go will be training. The second thing that will go will be equipment. And then, of course, the third thing that will be left is the number of police officers. While I am the first person to say that I'd rather have less officers but better officers, right? Because police officers at any given moment are grossly, I mean, the ratio between police officers and members of the public can be as one police officer to 100 people, or one police officer to 10,000 people, right? So any given moment, police officers are grossly outnumbered by the members of the public. So nobody can tell me, and by the way, there's no empirical or scientific research that shows that you need that many police officers per capita. There is no such thing. I always say, I'd rather have 10 good than 100 bad. But that's not how are you going to achieve the good and the bad. You need to give more resources to better recruitment. You need to change the standards for recruitment. You need to give more money for training. Taking this money and diverting it into other organizations, let's go back to what I started my talk with, the prehistoric society, with the berry gatherer who doesn't want to do the job. There are, as I say, some people tell me, you're using the wrong term. And I said, no, I'm using the right term. I think there are legitimate criminals out there. What does it mean, legitimate criminals? There are bad people out there. There are bad people out there who hurt their own communities. I always say, there is this perception that all the criminals come from a different planet. Actually, social science research shows that most of the criminals operate within their own communities. I don't think that there is somebody right now in San Bernardino, California, is planning to come to New York City to rob the store on the corner. It usually happens, the victims are the criminals victimize their own communities, their own families. They're there. You want to send the social workers and other non-sworn officers to deal with them? Sure. But there are those who are not going to be deterred by social workers or other types of professions do not have the coercive powers. At the end of the day, when we have all the shootings here in New York that you might have heard about in the past year, the shootings went through the roof. Right? We have shootings on a daily basis. Where are the shootings? They are in communities of color, in minority communities, majority of the shootings. It's not the police shooting the people there. They're their own people shooting their neighbors, their families. But it's not just here, anywhere in the world. It's nothing to do with, again, minority communities or non-minority communities. If you go to places in Europe, homogeneous countries like Poland, where I was born, 98%, or 99%, Catholic Poles, Christians, right? Where are the shootings? Where are the crimes? In poor communities, right? So it's related to economic status. It's related to various other things than race, because obviously it's not an issue there. Who is victimizing people in these communities? Their own members. We have this romanticized notion that that there aren't that many bad people out there, but they are all over the world, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity. And again, going back to Bittner, something ought not to be happening about something needs to be done right now. These two neighbors with the apple tree have nothing to do with race or ethnicity or economic status. They just, one wants his apple tree and the other doesn't want his apples. And we see it on a daily basis. And that's why we need the police. You know, Charles Rees, there's the same historian who came up with this idea of the berry gatherer. The berry gatherer was my idea, but the idea that the prehistoric societies had this first police officers who were designated by the leader. He also said that many historians still don't really understand why the Roman Empire collapsed, or why the Assyrian Empire collapsed, or why all these great empires collapsed thousands of years ago. And he felt that they collapsed because there was no effective police force that would separate the various unruly communities and the law-abiding communities, and sooner rather than later, these communities descended into dysfunctional behaviors that allowed the enemies to take over and destroy the empire. So yes, there was partially the impact of drought and partially the impact of climate change, and whether it's in South America or in Egypt, right? It's drought, the climate change, but he attributed the decline to lack of effective law enforcement.
So here's the big question. So you've done all this research, you've done all this study. Have you put together a description of the police department that you would like to see?
You know, I don't need to put it together because it already exists. As I mentioned, I spent some time with the police forces in Finland, and I spent some time with police forces in Norway. It's not that they don't have misconduct, but again, in any profession you'll find it. But these are the officers that I can call professionals. I can call them professionals because they are. When it comes to United States, the closest I came to see something like this is in Charlotte, North Carolina, when I also spent 2 years going back and forth. But it was years ago. Charlotte, North Carolina was really a department who at a certain point, at least when I was there, had a police chief who was not afraid to tackle any problem that the department had. There was an issue of use of force against minorities. He didn't deal with this internally. He brought KPMG. KPMG, an accounting firm that does audits of organizations, unheard of. He said, I want an external body to come in and tell me what's wrong, what's happening here. By the way, the head of their tactical SWAT team was a woman, right? So there were issues, and she was charged with excessive use of force. So just talking about, again, policing people who being policed by people who look like us, gender-wise, for example. He brought the KPMG. He was not afraid of bringing consultants from outside and including us, the researchers. It was a very open department. They had their own in-house academy. First of all, for me, we have too many police departments. Most of them don't have their own in-house academies. Most of them are trained in regional places that have very little understanding of the communities they go back to police at. We absolutely need to centralize our departments. We don't need 18,000. It will be enough to have 50, one for each state. And I'm not talking about state police. I'm talking about taking these hundreds of police departments that we have in each and every state. We have 600 police departments in the state of New York. 500 in the state of New Jersey, 300 in Connecticut. This is the tri-state area. We have 1,400 different departments. It's an absurd. We cannot start creating one good department when there are 17,999 others that will destroy the profession. When we centralize, we will be able to have a much better recruitment pool. We will be able to devote the resources to much better training and education, and we'll be able to have a mobility within the police force in such a way that will answer various problems that can occur in various communities. We'll be able to transfer people with certain skills, with certain leadership qualities to areas that are problematic. As long as we have the decentralized system, I cannot even envision this department. It's not going to exist. And if it's going to be created, it's going to be Disneyland. It's not going to be, it won't have a real effect on policing in America.
Dr. Haberfeld.
I'm sorry. I just have a sort of follow-up, if you don't mind, Marlo.
Yes, definitely.
Dr. Haberfeld, I totally respect the your research on policing. You've devoted, sounds like most of your adult life to this. I'm wondering if you have ever seen, speaking of empiricism, a relationship between the number of police officers in a given municipality and a drop in crime, or how does it affect crime? In other words, I'm asking, do police stop crime?
I don't think police stop crime, and I know it's not very popular when I say this in front of police chiefs and commissioners. There is very little evidence. Crime goes down when there is a saturated patrol in a given area. So it doesn't go down because suddenly the criminals decided to join the NGOs that work for the global peace. They just move. Crime is displaced. Crime does not go down because of policing. It's displaced because of policing. So if you have these so-called hotspots of drug dealing and suddenly you have a saturated patrol there for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, sure, the drug dealers go someplace else, but they don't change their profession. Mm-hmm. We are the biggest, in terms of demand, we have the highest demand for illegal substances out of all the countries around the world. So as long as people can make this money out of this, starting in Colombia, paying, I don't know, $400 per kilo of heroin and coming to the United States and paying $250,000 for this, we're going to have drug dealers and drug users.
Then why do we need police officers?
Again, we need police officers for all these other types of criminal behaviors. I was the first person who said we need to decriminalize drugs because we'll never win this war. But we do need the police officers for the apple tree. We need the police officers if a husband is beating his wife, or the wife is beating her husband or her wife, whatever. We need the police officers when a parent decides to iron their children's back as a form of punishment. And I walked into an apartment like this years ago, and it haunts me till today, seeing a parent ironing the back of his child. We need police officers to arrest and control individuals who break into apartments, houses, attack people on the streets, slash people in the streets. We need them to remove the criminals from the streets. They're not going to change the crime patterns, but they can deter through arresting the individual, for removing the individual. Are they going
and
to
they usually show up after the fact, don't they? I mean, somebody's stabbed, or there's a burglary or a robbery.
But then they arrest that person, and that person is not going to start the next person for the next, I don't know how many days or weeks or months. That's why we need the police. The neighbor with the apple tree from Egon Bittner's story will come back eventually to his home and shoot the apple tree owner unless they're going to reach some sort of an agreement, which probably is not going to happen. We have tremendous crime problems in the United States. We have, I don't have to tell you, in California, you have hundreds of gangs out there. Is the police going to control the gangs? No. Are they going to control an individual gang member? Yes. And that individual gang member who committed this crime is not going to commit the same crime next day. And this is the unfortunate story of humankind. We commit crimes. We commit crimes on various levels.
Dr. Haberfeld, I know on my job, one of the things we would say every time we got on the engine to go to a scene of an accident or whatever, we went to the fire or whatever, we were told, be the solution, not the problem. And I think in policing, they need to understand that that's their job, is to be the solution. You're right. I believe what you got to say, and we need them to mediate. But when they mediate, they need to be the solution as opposed to being the problem.
It's interesting that you use this word mediate, because this is one of the things, again, that I've written about in my critical issues book. Police officers use guns very rarely, on average, maybe a few times during their career. What they do use on a daily basis is their communication skills. Most of them have very little of those. And again, I'm saying this empirically based because over the years of teaching police officers, I had thousands of police officers as my students. Like 90% of them are afraid to do a PowerPoint presentation in class because their communication skills are not there. We don't teach them the communication skills. We give them, some academies don't teach communication skills, period. Some give them 10 hours. A basic communication skills in an academic environment, communication 101 lasts for a semester, 45 hours of communication skill. And this is just 101 without going to more advanced courses on communication. I don't know of any department that gives 45 hours of communication skills today. And this is, forget the mediation skills. In order to have mediation skills, you have to have communication skills, basic communication skills. When I analyzed the academic training curricula, I was beside myself. I mean, 80% of what they teach them could be taught on the job. 80% of what they need on the job was not offered during the academy. There was some years ago, there was this movie, Police Academy 1, Police Academy 2, Police Academy 3, right? I'm sure the older person in the audience remembers. And I thought that this was wonderful movies because they brought various people who did not belong on the job, and they showed that they can be good cops. Well, this is exactly why I'm saying we sort of have a misguided notion of what policing is all about. I might want to be an Olympic skier. I don't have skills to be an Olympic skier. Wanting to be a police officer is not enough.
Funny, but it's true, isn't it? And that's amazing. One of the questions is, do you think they should be limited, and the police officers should be limited to the use of deadly weapons by officers to more highly trained and special units to limit the amount of deadly deaths by cop? Yeah, go ahead.
Around the world that practice this, the UK being one of them, that they have specialized, they call them firearms officers. So not every police officer is armed there. There are specialized units. Over there, I think it works, and in some other countries it works well. I don't think it can work in America because of this tremendous numbers of illegal guns in the United States. We just don't have the time for the specialized unit to arrive. Somebody is shooting at somebody or at a police officer, it's not the time to call for the backup unit. It's not enough time, especially in departments that, you know, that cover large geographic areas, and it will take, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes for a tactical unit to arrive. We just need people who are more mature, more in control of their emotions, more in control of their discretionary decisions, and better trained. But they do need the guns.
That was in England, only as a young boy, and I was walking down the street, and this young man stole something from a store. And he was running down the street, and the Bobby showed up. He'd been called, and he showed up on his bicycle, got off his bicycle, and he took his baton, and he flung it like a Frisbee and tripped the guy. Walked up to the guy, picked him up, dusted him off, and the two of them walked back to the police station, which I didn't even know what police station was. To this day, I don't know what police station was, but there was a police station. And the only time I ever saw a gun was on a market day, and the police officer was called to the market because a bull had escaped, and he had to put down the bull. Only time I ever saw him with a gun.
You know, as I mentioned, I travel the world and look at police academies. So just before the pandemic, I was in Taiwan, and over there, it's also a police university. From day one, for 3 years, from day one, they teach them martial arts, right? When I watch some high-profile cases when police officers are trying to put handcuffs on an individual, and there are like 2, 3, 4, 5 police officers cannot do it, I just raise my hands. I said, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, really? I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, but this is what we do not give the martial arts skills to our police officers. So if we give them, they're done in few weeks. So, you know, to get a black belt in karate, you have to study for 4 years, at least, minimum. So police academies that tell me here, oh yeah, we do martial arts. I said, no. This is liability training. I call it liability training. So you can say that you gave them the skills. You didn't give them any skills because they still don't know how to put handcuffs on. So there are solutions. They're not earth-shaking. They do not require rethinking or reimagining. I don't like this word. The solutions are there. They're modeled by other countries. All we have to do is demand a transformational change. What we're demanding now is transactional change. Give us more diversity, give us more training on this, training on that. We really need to transform our policing. And it's a painful thing when you transform. And we need to centralize in order to transform. And every mayor of every little jurisdiction who has a police department of 5.5 cops, and we have plenty of those around the country, doesn't want to give up his or her army. They want their own police force, and they will fight till their death not to centralize the police departments in their jurisdiction. But somebody needs to make this decision, again, as I said, for my life's work to have any validity. And of course, before that, for people out there in the communities to stop fearing the cops, to start respecting the cops, and for the police officers. Again, the majority of them really want to do the right thing. And the fact that they cannot do it, it's not their fault. Shouldn't be on the job.
Dr. Haberfeld, in your experience and opinion, if you may, do you think that the funding of the department and the pay and salary of the officers in that department directly affects how they do their job? No matter their tenure? Do you think that?
You know, when I first became an academic here, and I started teaching in New Jersey City University, and the Jersey City Police Department is one of the largest police departments in New Jersey, but also one of the poorest paid police departments in New Jersey. They asked me to come and give them a one-day training on multicultural issues. But the first thing that I asked them, the cops, this was the last day at the academy. I asked them, why did you become police officers? And they said, well, you know, good benefits, good salary. I'm saying good salary. I mean, they're one of the least paid police officers in the state. I don't want to see people on the job who are motivated by the salary. You know, I could probably make more money in other professions, but I chose the police profession because I believed in the importance of this profession. Granted, over the years of research in other countries, and I was doing research in some former Eastern European bloc, Russian bloc countries, the police officers would tell me, you know, if I cannot put food on the table, I'm going to take the bribe. That's as simple as that. Well, there's a difference between having corrupted police officers and police officers who engage in excessive use of force. So if you pay them well, they'd be less corrupted economically, but it's not going to change the excessive use of force, which has nothing to do with, again, the pay scale, but the certain skills that individuals have to have. And again, I certainly didn't have these skills when I was a police officer.
Zorlin, definitely hop in there if you have a question.
Yeah, I had a question. You had raised this point discussing how it's up to the community to not accept maybe the corrupt policing that they experience and things like that. But it makes me question here in America, like how white America normally is the supporters of police officers, although there are some in the Black community. The Black community for ages has spoke up against the injustice that they've experienced with the police officers, but yet the majority white community often shows their support. So can you answer the question, how, if people of color have for years, if not years, have been saying like, we cannot accept this any longer, as we've seen all throughout last year with the BLM movement gaining such huge strides through the country, how can we change that? If the community of color have been saying, we cannot accept this, but yet nothing's changed, because we're people too, and we matter, and our opinions matter. So if we have been saying, we don't accept this, why hasn't anything changed?
So when I started looking at this issue, when I was doing research for my first book about the lack of trust and lack of communication between communities of color and the police in America, I basically came across this history of Southern slave patrols, right? And this is where I actually read one account of one of the former slaves that really stuck with me, because he had written that the worst memory of him being a slave was not actually from being a slave, but being policed by the Southern slave patrols, the abuse that he had experienced from the Southern slave patrols that were, in essence, the first modality of American policing. So there is a history here that goes back hundreds of years. But the problem with this history, beyond this being a horrible history, is that not enough research has been done to document what exactly is going on. I remember being interviewed once by a certain media person, and she said to me, you know, all these abuses of the community by all these police officers in the United States. I said to her, well, you're saying this as if this is a fact, but this is not empirically proven. And she literally like threw me out of the program. They said, oh, I don't want to talk to you. And I said, you didn't let me finish. Things change when they're properly documented. We have very little empirical research on how communities of color were policed over the last, let's say, 50, 60 years. Very little research on this. So when things are more testimonial rather than empirical, and people focus on a case here and a case there, and start saying, you know, there's this constant abuse, but in order for things to start changing, at least in my mind, there needs to be solid data. We don't have enough solid data. And again, you know, over the years, there is less and less money allocated to research on policing. Over the years, it's harder and harder. It's harder and harder to get into police departments and do research in police departments, again, because the politicians are blocking things. The research that I was able to do in police department 20 years ago, I cannot. I mentioned Charlotte before. I was able to go anywhere and do anything in Charlotte. I was able to go and do anything and everything I wanted in Charleston. Today, they don't even, I had a doctoral student who asked them to run a questionnaire. They said no. So communities need to understand you cannot change based on personal opinion, right? You cannot change based on my experience. You cannot change based on your experience. Things need to be documented. Things need to be shown. There's very little research on how Black police officers treat their own communities, but there is one research that showed, this research is right now almost 30 years old. The concept of double marginality emerged from this research. What is double marginality? The researchers found out that the Black cops actually were policing their own communities in a much harsher way because they wanted to show their white counterparts that they're not partial to their communities. This was very interesting research. I would like to see this research replicated over the years. One piece disappeared, nobody really received any funding. There's a lot of funding now for body-worn camera research. That's not where we're supposed to go, at least in my mind. Body-worn cameras show very little in terms of overall subculture of an organization. They show a fragment of interaction. They don't give all the context. I would rather have this money allocated to studying police subcultures and studying the influences of the politician and studying the disciplinary decisions that are made. Just today, I got a query from a reporter in Florida who asked me what is my opinion on one of the departments there where one of the police officers was found guilty of perjury and false statements and 17 other violations, and the police chief basically dismissed all the findings of the internal affairs, and the person is still on the job. And he said to, and he basically asked me, is it unusual? I said, no, it's not unusual at all that the police commissioners have, or police chiefs have this power to dismiss the findings of any internal affairs investigations. These are the things that need to be documented. The fact that I was lucky enough to be part of this team that was sponsored by National Institute of Justice, we received $1 million over 20 years ago to study this department. There is no follow-up research on this. There is no money for this. And literally, you can do so much with relatively little money to create this momentum for change. But high-profile cases like Mr. Floyd, they're not going to change. They're not going to change the fundamentals of American policing. They're not going to.
So they're going to keep killing Black men?
They're going to keep behaving in the same way they behaved until now. I don't want to say that they're going to keep killing anybody specifically. They're going to behave the same way, yes.
Well, that's a real downer to end our
well,
talk.
I've been known to be very dark in my thoughts, but when I see, when one thing I will say that I think it's very important to me. And over the last year, I was contacted by a number of government institutions, by the office of the governor here in New York, by the Office of Criminal Justice Coordinator in North Carolina, by the mayor of Salt Lake City, just to give you an example. Right? I was very encouraged by this. Wow, they're reaching out to somebody who actually studied policing as a profession her entire life. Actually, somebody who doesn't have just personal opinions, but can back the opinions with solid research. Well, unfortunately, my interactions with these entities were very minimal. They reached out, they heard what I have to say, which is pretty much what I told you. You need to change your standards for recruitment. You need to change your training. You need to centralize, because nobody wanted to hear this. So, you know, when you think about this, we are in the midst of pandemic. Can you imagine if people working on the vaccine were just politicians and people who had opinions instead of medical doctors and medical professionals? We would never get out of this pandemic. You have a problem. You have to enlist social scientists. You cannot ask police chiefs how to change themselves and police commissioners. You know, we have all these committees and commissions that are composed of law enforcement, police officers, you know, chiefs, commissioners. You're asking them how to change? They don't know how to change. You have to ask social scientists, and we have quite a lot of those. I'm not the only person who studies policing in this country. There are hundreds of social scientists, if not thousands of social scientists from different fields. I happen to have a degree in criminal justice, but there are sociologists and psychologists and political scientists who study policing. We know what needs to be done. We don't all agree on the same, but we are not brought to the table. We are not brought to the table to bring the solution.
It goes back to what you said earlier in your talk. It says, take the police out of the politics and the politics out of policing, and it hasn't happened.
No, and it's not happening. And as long as, again, Sir Robert Peel said this 200 years ago. Everybody's quoting him and saying what a great politician he was. He created, you know, the fundamentals of community policing. Yes, but with the caveat that it will never happen unless the politics are out of policing. Nobody pays attention to this little sentence.
I had a quick question real quick to follow up also. You suggested that we shouldn't focus on personal opinion or personal experience, but focus on the data. What is the data that we can use? Because in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's kind of like where data comes from, is questioning people that have experienced things like that. So what is the data that we need? Because obviously, like, I haven't been in any crazy interactions with the police, but those who have are incarcerated, and those who are incarcerated are Black and brown people at massive rates. So if we're gonna ask anybody about anything or try to collect data, we would have to look at those who've been incarcerated, which are Black and brown people, which brings me back to my original point. It's Black and brown people who are being affected, and Mary's point, are they just gonna keep killing Black men? Like, I hope that makes sense. I think it's just,
I think I know. I think I understand what you're saying. I think I understand what you're saying. But again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. Majority of people who are incarcerated, not majority again, I mean, we have the largest incarcerated population in comparison to another democratic country. So this is a problem by itself. Many of those incarcerated for drug-related offenses. Police officers don't create these laws. They said, okay, drugs are illegal. So whoever is out there, you know, in possession of drugs, you can incarcerate them. And again, it's a vicious circle. So in order to change, you need to look at what kind of offenses people are incarcerated for, right? So, but at the same time, you will continue, if you're not going to decriminalize drugs, you're going to continue to give police officers this information that whoever has drugs can be incarcerated. And this is not to say that, again, the majority of people who use drugs are of certain ethnic or racial background, because again, going back to Poland that I'm familiar with, they have tremendous drug problems there. And again, 98, 99% white and Catholic. But this is to say that policing is a profession predicated upon discretion. So that's another exercise that I do with my students when I teach. I ask them, if you're a police officer and you were told that you need to give a certain number of summonses for jaywalking, which is crossing the people when people cross the red light. And you are standing out there and 5 people are standing next to you. And I specifically make these people who are standing next to you very diverse. One is young, one is old, one is black, one is Hispanic, one is disabled. And they all start jaywalking at the same time. You're standing there, they all start jaywalking at the same time. Who do you reach out to and arrest? And of course, people tend to say, oh, probably the black person or the Hispanic or the young or the old. Until somebody realizes that actually maybe the first person that's going to be arrested will be the disabled one. And why? Because it's the easiest way, the fastest way to reach out to that person. A police officer has discretion, cannot arrest everybody. What is the easiest way to make an arrest when you have to make an arrest? To arrest somebody who is the easiest target. Just in this example, speed-wise, the disabled person was the first one the police officer was able to reach out. The young person moved quickly, the others, the black, the Hispanic, and the disabled was halfway through the intersection. And that's how police work is. So if I know that there are drug users on a certain corner, I'll go there. And if I know, because this is the easiest target for me. If this corner happened to be in a certain neighborhood, I don't necessarily think that this is a thought process. The thought process is, what is the easiest way for me? Where is the easiest way for me to make the arrest? So again, these are very simple yet very complex notions that have to be considered when we talk about who is the right person to be a police officer. Don't go where it's the easiest way for you to arrest somebody. Use other types of discretion, other considerations. But as I said before, you know, especially in New York City, sometimes there were times, and again, not speaking about now because of COVID, there are different considerations now. You know, there are quotas, and they denied that there are quotas, but there are quotas. You need to bring a certain number of summonses. You need to arrest a certain number of people. Okay, where do you go? Where do you go? There are different ways that people use drugs in Harlem versus on Park Avenue. And Park Avenue, whoever doesn't know, is like the posh neighborhood. Huh? If I live on Park Avenue, I'm going to use my drugs behind my closed doors in my dormant apartment. If I live in Harlem, I might be using drugs, you know, outside with my friends. As a police officer, where is it easier for me to arrest? In a dormant building or on the street? Go and arrest on the street.
And we have laws that say if you're using crack, you do life. If you're using cocaine, you do 2 years or
yeah, because cocaine is the designer drug and crack is the poor drug. So again, it's a matter also of the economic disparity, right? Everybody's focusing on policing, but the disparity really starts with the economic disparity, because there are quite a few individuals out there who are wealthy regardless of the color of their skin, they are more protected than the ones who are not wealthy. That's the reality everywhere, not just in America.
Well, we had lots of questions, but unfortunately we don't have time. We need to let you go. I know it's kind of late where you are. It's not midnight, but it's later than here. It's later than here, and we thank you for being so gracious and sharing your research with us, sharing your information. We truly appreciate it.
You're most welcome, and whoever is here or had to go, you can always share my my email, and I am always happy to answer. And I always hope that somebody, even if one person in my audience one day will be in a position of making a difference, they will remember what I said.
Yeah, all of us teachers hope that. All of us researchers
that's true.
Hope that we can make a difference. And I think you are, Dr. Haberfeld. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Marlo, do you want to take us out?
Yes, I am here. Thank you as well, Dr. Haberfeld. That was a very great aspect to the show as well. You raised a lot of questions and we're right there to answer them as well. So.
By the way, one more thing that I want to say before I leave. When Chauvin shooting happened years ago, some of you might remember, and Chauvin was shot, by the way, by
transit police. Police.
By the undercover unit. I was interviewed by ABC News, and then again and again, and I asked them, why don't you make a show? Why don't you make a show on television, national television, that will discuss the issues between police and community? And Chauvin shooting was like 13, 14 years ago. We need to talk about this. The more we talk about this, the better it will become. And the producer told me, our audience is not ready for this.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what we're trying to do. That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, guys, we'll see you all same time next week. Next Wednesday for Corps, Conversations on Race and Policing at 3 p.m. California time.
Can I just do a little plug on that? And Robbie, maybe you can help me. We have former police chief Norm Stamper, and you probably heard of him, Dr. Haberfeld. He was very famously in Seattle as well as San Diego. He's been retired for a few years, but he always does a fantastic presentation, and we hope you will join us next. Did I say everything, Robbie, or should you add anything? Okay.
You got it. 34 years in law enforcement. I believe 6 of them as chief of police for the Seattle Police Department, and he was chief of police when the WTO protest happened.
Yes. Good guy though, and we hope you'll join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Maria. We'll see you soon.